You never step in the same river twice. That's a paraphrase of a quote from an ancient Greek philosopher named Heraclitus. It means that we and our world are in a constant state of change. The saying is also a theme of a travel book by today's guest, Pam Mandel. Welcome to Dope Content. I'm Laura Bergels, and with me are Scott Smith and Elizabeth Godey. Our guest today is Pam Mandel, who is joining us from Seattle. Pam is a versatile and tech-savvy author. She has nearly 20 years' experience in user assistance, content strategy, documentation, copywriting, social media, mobile apps, you name it, Pam's done it. One of Pam's clients described her as the Swiss Army knife of skills. And Pam's memoir, The Same River Twice, is a gritty coming-of-age travel story. It was published in November 2020 on Skyhorse Press. What inspired you to write the book?
Right. This is the story I'm dining out on lately. If we were dining out, this would be my dining out story. A friend of mine started a magazine called Fields and Stations. It's a beautiful, small distribution boutique travel magazine. My friend Alex Robertson Texter, he started it. I think they're in their third year now. And Alex and I have been friends through travel writing for more than a decade at this point. So when he started this magazine, he asked me if I would like to write a recollection memoir type essay to close the inaugural issue of the magazine with. He's like, I'm holding this slot for you. I'm a big fan of your work. And I would love to give you this space at the back of the book for our launch. And I said, no, I can't do it. I had been suffering from a very severe depression and my creative juice was just dried up. I was sleeping and crying and sleeping and crying. Pretty much that was how I was spending my time, and writing was hugely challenging to me. I had to quit my job for a while. So Alex and I had several conversations over the course of maybe 2 months, and Alex would call me and say, I'm calling to see how you're doing. And I still would love to have a piece from you. And I hope you're getting the help you need. And I would say, yeah, I guess I'm doing okay. And I'm still not going to write this story for you. And one day, Alex and I were talking on the phone, and he said to me, did you tell me that sometime in the 80s, excuse me while I put the dog down, sometime in the early 80s, you were in Sharm el-Sheikh, which is the bottom of the Sinai Peninsula before it went back to Egypt, while it was still the Israelis? And I said, yeah, I was there. And that was in the early 80s. And now here we are in, many, many years later. I don't remember very much about it. And he said, well, that is exactly the kind of story that I would love for you to write for me for this issue. And just think about it, please, and let me know. So I put the phone down and I turned on my computer and I sent Alex 1,600 words. And then I could not stop. Alex did this thing where he sent me up into the attic of my memory, and I opened the box and all this stuff just came flying out of a hole. It was kind of a magical situation where I didn't realize that I had been holding this story so long. And by asking me this one question, hey, did you tell me that you were in this place in this time? I just tapped into this deep well of memory that allowed me to write the book.
Tell us about the book.
So the book covers essentially 3 years, although there's some padding on either end, between the time I graduated high school and I came back to the US. And my father, as a graduation from high school present, sent me to participate in a birthright tour in Israel, which is where good Jewish kids go to the homeland and bond with the Jewish people. This trip did not end up being what I think he had intended it to be. And since you guys have read the book, you know that is it just went off the rails. Things went off the rails. And I ended up embarking on this crazy global adventure, which covers 3 continents, some long haul flights and some hitchhiking and some running out of money and some sleeping in bomb shelters and in hedges and just being kind of cut loose from the constraints of sensible daily life in any way. One is that I end up in a abusive relationship, and the other is that there are some very complicated stuff going on with my family. And so at various junctions, when I try to get out and try to go home, it doesn't happen. It can't happen. It seems like an impossible thing to stop doing what I'm doing and go home. And so that's sort of what impels this thing to keep going when it really should have stopped much, much sooner than it did. And forgive me for being a little bit vague. I don't want to like totally give the story away to folks who are watching, but it's, yeah, circumstances were unkind.
The places you've traveled, I know you became a travel writer. I know that's not as much of a thing now as you would like it to be, of course. But the thing that I always have to know is, where's the best coffee?
Oh, my house? I don't know. Right now, it's a hard question right now. So I have a funny thing about coffee, which is there's two things, right? One is that I'm a little bit snotty about it because, I live in Seattle. We have good coffee everywhere. Yeah. And I love my coffee house, which is down the hill from me. It's an independent place called C&P, and they carry coffee from Lighthouse Roasters. But the reason I love them has as much to do with their role in the community as it does for their coffee. So there's some funny things about that. And then there's also the idea of functional coffee, which is coffee that you're like, I think of airport coffee as a really good example of functional coffee. And airport coffee, when it is delivered to you at a time when you need it, is often the best coffee you've ever had because it's contextualized, right? You got off the long flight, you're like stretching your legs, you're waiting to change planes, you have 20 minutes, you found a really good place to sit, and you have this airport coffee and it's delicious. So I don't know that I'm so specific about it. I mean, there's a way I like my coffee, but there's so many things around it for me that make it good coffee that the coffee I'm drinking this morning it came to my house 2 days ago from a friend who sent it to me from Hawaii. She sent me a half a pound of Hawaiian coffee. And I love it because it's a gift from her. So it is very good coffee.
You have such an optimistic outlook. I love it. I love it so much. Where I thought Scott was going to go with his question was, where is your favorite place you've been?
Right. Or where did I want to go next? People like to ask that. Where's your favorite place and where do you want to go next? So, I've been traveling in the US over the last couple of years, and it has been totally fascinating. And the best trip that I've probably done in the last 5 years was I spent 10 days knocking around the Mississippi Delta. And I loved that trip. It was so good. I learned so much. The people were incredibly friendly. I was having all the good things you have when you travel, where you get to talk to strangers and they tell you crazy stories and you get to try new food without any of the logistical mysteries, right? Like, how do I explain to this guy that my front tire is a little low and I need air, right? I just went into and this is truly a thing that happened. And I just went in and said, hey, my front tire is a little low. I need air. And he's like, the thing's over there. It takes quarters. Do you need quarters, right? You don't have to do any of that kind of stuff. But I still had this sense of being deep in a culture that was not familiar to me. I was born and raised on the West Coast. I live in the Northwest corner. And I got to knock around the Mississippi Delta where there's such deep history, and it's, music and American history and farming and slavery and all these things that happen there. And I got to go explore that and also just have, great meals and friendly people. It was really great, actually. So that's probably the best thing I've done in a while. As far as like where I want to go next, like anywhere that's not my house would be great. Like I just don't care. I think anywhere that's not here is going to be amazing.
Yep. Well, other than being a travel writer, you also write and do other tasks for clients. So tell us what you've been doing lately.
Yeah, so I pay most of my bills as a technical writer and or content strategist and or copywriter, right? So I live in a sort of broad space where I do the work with content that people pay me to do. Right now, I'm writing content for an affiliate sales site. I'm reviewing products for them, and that's pretty much straight up copy with a fair bit of research underneath it. And I'm also on a technical documentation team for a software company that's here in Seattle. So I write very, meaty, how to do this technical task kind of stuff.
So my one question is this. So I also have a BFA, and you said it was in fine arts. So I have two questions for you. One is, what was your medium? And my second question is, if it was not related to creative writing, how did you transition to writing?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I did painting. I was a painter, and I was a painter for a long time. I actually, I gave it up when I gave up my studio to buy a condo in the city, right? I had to give up my studio space. I worked in oil, and so I couldn't really work at home, and I like to make a big mess, and I like to work large scale. Like I worked like my reach. And I had a super cool space with a concrete floor and like crap everywhere. I loved it. I have a little workshop now, and sometimes I screw around out there, but I'm not really making paintings. But I was a painter for many years. I did like large mixed media stuff on paper with oil and wax.
Cool.
So, and then how did I transition? Was that the other question?
Yeah. How did you transition to writing?
Yeah, so I was working at an art supply store, as one does when they graduate with a BFA. And my friend John, who was I worked for Daniel Smith. Do you know them?
Yeah.
Okay, so I worked at Dan Smith is here in Seattle, and I worked the special order desk in the store. And my friend John made paint in manufacturing. And John showed up at work one day, and he said, my mom, her team at Microsoft is hiring for all these writing jobs. And she was asking me if I knew anybody who seemed like they were smart enough to do this. And are you interested? Do you want to apply for this job? And, I was working at an art supply store, right? And I was working for slightly more than minimum wage, like $7 an hour or something at the time. Like it was pennies. I was, a poor art school graduate. And I lived in a 200 square foot apartment, and, it's the whole thing, right? And I was like, yeah, I want to. So I went and took a test. I took a writing test. And the job that I got as a result of passing that writing test was writing captions for Encarta, which was Microsoft's CD-ROM encyclopedia. And so I commuted out to Microsoft every day, and I would get there, and they would give me this stack of images and an internet connection and a weird CMS to work in. And I'd pull up the image, and I'd be like, okay, this is my word count. This is the essential thing about this photo. So that was my first writing gig. And as a result of that gig, also it was the early 90s in Seattle. So it was like .com boom time. And if you had a pulse and knew how to write a sentence, you got a good job. That was my first one, and it seemed like it paid me a fortune. I think I was getting like $24 an hour, and I was like, I am living large, right? Because I went from earning, barely above minimum wage to actually being able to pay my rent and, all that stuff. So that was my first gig, and that was early 90s. And again, and I got picked up for increasingly more technical things. I did what was called at the time natural language indexing, because a woman that I carpooled with needed somebody to do it. And they didn't really know what the job was in a very specific way. She built one of the first natural language search engines that for end users that Microsoft ran. She won a bunch of awards for this stuff. And I just knew her because I was carpooling. And she's like, you seem like you're good with words. Do you want to work on this? And I was like, yeah, I guess. So I kept getting knocked into these increasingly more technical gigs because I was there. I was I showed up. But I think that's not an unusual story for the time either. There's I've since worked with a ton of creatives, musicians, artists, photographers who in Seattle specifically, because, we had this boom, that have very similar stories.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing how sometimes just a brief conversation can turn your entire world.
Timing, man.
Yeah.
The timing thing was, it was key. I should be a retired millionaire now, but I kept quitting to go travel. I always worked contract. And so I never took a staff job. If I had taken a staff job, my life would look very different. But I just kept being like, I kept getting offered these jobs and I was like, that's cool, but I'm going to go travel the Australian outback for 2 months. So if you want to hold that, and they'd be like, what are you, crazy? Like, no, we're not going to hold this job. We're going to hire someone else. So they never wanted me because, or not, I shouldn't say that. They wanted me. I didn't want them. They weren't going to give me the freedom that I wanted to do these other crazy things, to travel, to do creative stuff. And so I know people who said yes, where I said no, and they're financially very, very stable. So
But they're probably not as much fun as you.
I like to think that. I don't know if that's true.
Have you got it in you again to do another book that is not a guidebook, but more of a memoir or a nonfiction?
I hope so.
Do you?
I really hope so. I have a project that's sitting on my hard drive that I have some ideas about reviving. I got some advice while I was working on this project that I put away. And what my old editor from World Home, which is a travel site that I used to write for, Jim Benning, I was talking to him once about getting a book written. And he's like, you have to just keep going. You have to write all the way through. Don't stop. Don't look back. Write the first draft. Go all the way through. It was a really good piece of advice. And so when I sat down to do this book, The Same River Twice, that's what I did. This other project, I would put it away and then I would start again at the beginning, and I put it away and start again at the beginning. It was bad. That's not a good way to work. He was totally right about that. But I have hopes to crack that project open. Now that I know that I can do this, I did not know that I could sustain this kind of work. The sweet spot for me has really been like 1,600, 2,000 words, personal essay, front of the magazine kind of stuff. I've been really comfortable with that. I didn't know that I could sit down and write 75,000 words, 80,000 words, and actually sustain that. And when I was working on this other project, I would just keep doing it in these 1,600 word chunks and then go back to the beginning. So I hope that once my head sort of clears from the dust of dropping this book, because it's still not that, it hasn't been out that long. It's only November since it's been out. And so many things are going on, right? Like there's like a freight train going past all of our houses all the time with all the stuff that's happening in the world, that my focus is not great right now.
Right.
But I hope that if we get to a place, fingers crossed, where things quiet down a little bit, I'll be able to crack that thing open and go, all right, that was a good idea. Do it right this time. Quit screwing around, write it through to the end. So yeah. I hope so.
I'd love to ask you about process then for writing this book, because you said, okay, I sat down and I wrote it. 80,000 words is a lot of words to get a first draft through.
Yeah.
Did you say, okay, every day I'm going to write 2,000 words, or what was your process?
A lot less than that, actually, but also exactly that. I would get up in the morning and I would make coffee and I would turn on the computer before I did anything else. So I'd sit here where I'm sitting now with my coffee and I would write to the counter and I would write 500 words, and I was not allowed to do anything else. Nothing, no email, no walking the dog, nothing until I had 500 words down. Some mornings it was a slam dunk. I'd get 500 words done and then I'd be like, done for the day, got work to do, got stuff to, Some mornings it was a slog and I was like, come on, you got it. You just write. And I would stare at the screen, writing days are what they are. And other days when I would just have the wind in my sails and I would hammer out 2,500, 5,000 words because I was totally feeling it. And I would write for as long as it felt good, but I had a daily minimum and I did that at least 5 days a week. Sometimes I did it 7, but if you write 500 words every day, every single day, eventually you will have that many words. You will have a full manuscript. You can't help it but happen. It may not be any good, but it will exist.
Right.
So you had your first draft, and probably that took 3-4 months?
Yeah, almost exactly 4 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you had to go through editing.
Yeah.
Then did you do all that yourself or did you hire an editor?
So when my book, this is another piece of advice I got from my friend Andrew Evans. So I finished my manuscript, and I think I did one edit myself where I just wanted to polish it a little bit and fix some, like there was, I had to do a read through when it was done. And then my friend Andrew Evans said to me, stop it, stop messing with it, because when you sell this book, he said, when, not if, when you sell this book, they're going to give you an editor, and that editor is going to tell you what they want, and you are going to have to work with them. So put it away, quit screwing around. You will edit it forever. And still some other external person is going to come in and say, nope, this is what, so stop and start pitching. Quit screwing around. So I didn't have an editor until the book was sold. And that was in November 2019. And then I worked directly with my editor from the press.
Interesting. So what about the pitch process? How did that go for you?
So I hated it. It was terrible.
I saw it on Twitter.
And, pardon me?
I saw it happening on Twitter.
It happened on Twitter. So I did all the things. I wrote a proposal. I put my resume together. I had manuscripts in various size chunks. And I don't know what you collectively know about the process, but briefly, you pitch an agent and they say, here are the things we want. And they never want the same thing twice. So they can even be in the same agency and they don't want the same thing. So I had this kit that had all the pieces of a proposal, right? And so I would snap all the Lego together and send it off to the agent. And then I would wait and wait and wait. And I did this for maybe 6 months until I got to 75. And I was rejected and ignored. Almost 100% rejected or ignored. Those were the two things. And I got a handful of glowing rejections, which were excruciating for me because it is a really hard thing to hear that an agent loves your work and is not going to get behind it to sell it. It is so much easier for them to say, not for me, not a fit for our agency, generic, good luck on your. So the more I was in the process, the more I appreciated the canned rejection because I could just move on, right? But when an agent took the time to write me a personal note that said, I loved your book, you write really well, this is an incredible story, there is no way I can bring this to market, it was crushing. So the process is really hard. And when I got to the end of these 75 rejections, I got a message from a guy on Twitter who said, I've seen that. So I was posting my count maybe once a week. I pitched once a week and I would post my count to Twitter and I would say, today I pitched 3 agents. I got 4 rejections. I have 17 out. And I did this for over the course of this process. And this acquisitions editor messaged me and said, I see you've been pitching a book. I've been following your work for a while. Can I see it? That's eventually the editor that bought my book. So I don't have an agent. I sold it without an agent directly to the press because the acquisitions editor saw me making noise on Twitter about what I was doing.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's a crazy story. I don't know that it's replicable, but I do think it's important to let people know that you're trying to get a thing done because I got referrals to other people's agents. Writer friends gave me their agents' names, or they would introduce me, or they would offer to send my proposal in. And if I had sat in silence quietly pitching my book and not telling anybody what I was up to, none of that would have happened.
I think that story is important for a lot of writers because I don't think anybody's journey is exactly the same. Like you said, you can't step in the same river twice. You can't get your book deal or published the same way twice. Even when people ask me, how did you get that? I'm like, listen, if you're asking me how I did it with the intention of how can you do it, 2 different things entirely.
Right. I had a writer friend over, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, and I was telling her that now that I know what it takes to get a book published, it is a miracle to me that any books get published at all. Like, I can't believe it. The process is Byzantine. It's like an Escher painting, right? Where you think you're going one way and then you're like falling off the stairs because they're upside down. It's so weird.
Well, thank you for being with us for today and for sharing your story, not just in book form, but for sharing a little bit of it with us here today and your process about how you get there. We're looking forward to seeing what you do next. And could you tell us about where people can find you and if they want to hire you, where they should reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So I'm nerdseiview.com. I'm pretty much all the things. And then for my tech work, my content work, that sort of stuff, the best way to reach me is, of course, through the monster LinkedIn. And it's just under my name, Pam Mandel, and I'm the one in Seattle. So, I have all the stuff there, my previous client lists, my recommendations, all of that sort of stuff is there. So nerdseiview.com is the best place. And there's actually links to everything. If you go to nerdseiview.com, you'll find links to my Twitter, my Facebook, my LinkedIn, all the stuff there. There's also a page there about the book. And I would like to make a pitch for the independent bookstores. Please shop independent bookstores. If you can, if you want to get the book, call your local bookstore. And if you don't have the cash to plunk down for it, ask your library to get it for you. That's just as good a way. It supports me and it supports your local library. And then I get to live in your library for my whole life. So that's exciting to me.